Take me to the cafe where Dad and Mom used to go before you two got married. My daughter Emily asked us, so we headed to the nostalgic cafe with her. Dad and Mom were close even before I was born, right? How would I remember? How about you, Evan? Don't remember something from so long ago. After a while, the waiter brought over 2 large puddings. 15 years ago, when Evan and I were dating, we often had this pudding. By the way, it's been exactly 15 years since we got married. As I took a bite, I realized something and checked the date on my phone. Today is Dad, Mom, happy 15th anniversary. I was overwhelmed by the unexpected surprise from my daughter. Dad, Mom, please stay happy together forever. I was so glad that Emily had grown up to be such a kind daughter. Yeah, it's delicious. The pudding that you treated us to is really delicious, Emily. When I said this to her with a big smile, she smiled back at me. Emily is growing up so quickly without us even noticing, I said, glancing casually at my husband, Evan. In that moment, I decided that today would be the last day we would be a family. My name is Marcia, and I'm 40 years old. I work part-time at a local supermarket and live with my husband Evan and our daughter Emily. Both Evan and I loved children, so we naturally dreamed of having a family after getting married. However, years passed, and I still couldn't have children. This is something that just happens, so there's nothing we can do, Evan said to comfort me, but as we got older, I started to feel more and more anxious. Even though we went to the hospital for tests, neither of us had any problems. Knowing there was a possibility, we researched everything we could about trying to conceive whenever we had time. Evan was supportive and understanding, but my PIL were harsh with me. Marcia, don't you have children yet? We won't live forever, and we'd love to see our cute grandchild soon. Every time my mother-in-law Caddy visited our apartment, she would say that. At first, her tone was gentle, but as time passed with no results, her words became harsher. Evan's classmate just had their 3rd child. The eldest is already in middle school. And Evan doesn't have any children yet? What's going on? Indirectly criticizing me for not being able to conceive, I began to feel increasingly uncomfortable around her. Sean, my father-in-law, shared Caddy's opinion. We had Evan about a year after we got married. How long have you been married to him? It's been 9 years. And still no children? Every time I saw them, all I could do was bow my head and apologize. In the past, a wife who couldn't have children would be divorced and sent away immediately. Nowadays, it's a much more forgiving time. That's right. Men these days spoil their wives, and that's why the number of children isn't increasing. Mom, Dad, enough already. Evan stepped in between me and his parents, defending me. Normally gentle, he always stood up for me, especially when it came to the topic of children. Marcia is trying so hard to have a child. She's even careful about her diet. Don't push her any further. Caddy sneered at this. If she's trying that hard and still can't conceive, then maybe she has some problem. What do you mean by that? How can you say it's her fault? The hospital results showed no issues with her body. Caddy looked at him with a surprised expression. But isn't it true? She looked him in the eyes. If children are a gift from God, it wouldn't be strange for her to have 1 or 2 by now. Since she can't, it must be her fault. Yes, Caddy is right. Marcia must be doing something wrong. My parents-in-law nodded in agreement. What era are you living in? Don't stress her with these unscientific reasons. Mom, Dad, stop interfering with our lives. Evan forcefully escorted his parents out of the house. Don't let what Mom and Dad said bother you, Marcia. Evan comforted me with kind words, and I held back my urge to run away and face the infertility treatments. Evan did his own research on ways to conceive. Every time he found new information. How about this? Maybe we should try this? He would suggest. I tried everything I could. Maybe it was because of these efforts that, after 10 years of marriage, I finally became pregnant with our first child. Thank you, Evan. Without your support, I might have given up on having a child by now. I might have run away from this harsh reality. What are you talking about? You're the one who has been working so hard, Marcia. I just did what I could. Right now, it's not about me. It doesn't matter if it's a boy or a girl. Just give birth to a healthy baby. Even when I felt overwhelmed with anxiety during my first pregnancy, just feeling his presence near me gave me courage. Then, as spring arrived, I safely gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Evan and I named our daughter Emily. Holding our newborn child in my arms, I found every feature, from her still-forming eyes, nose, and mouth, utterly lovable. This child was born to us, and now she was sleeping peacefully in my arms. Determined to ensure she would have a happy life, I vowed to overcome any hardship for her sake. As I felt her tiny heartbeat and gentle breaths, I swore to protect Emily with all my might. Looking at her sleeping face, she looks just like you, Marcia. You can't tell that yet. Don't you think her ear shape resembles yours? Really? Her nose looks like yours. She'll definitely grow up to be beautiful. Just then, there was a knock on the hospital room door, and my parents-in-law entered, their faces devoid of smiles. My heart, full of happiness, suddenly darkened as if clouds had gathered. Congratulations, Marcia. You finally had a child. It was as if they were implying I had been refusing to have a child all this time. Still, I decided to welcome them with a big smile. Seeing their grandchild's face might soften the expressions of my parents-in-law. Somewhere in my heart, I hoped for this. However, the moment Caddy looked at Emily's face, she exclaimed, "After waiting for 10 years, and this is the result? I'm utterly speechless." She didn't even attempt to touch Emily. "If you were going to have a child, it should have been a boy. This is absolutely unacceptable." She dramatically placed her hand on her forehead and sighed. "Well, it's a girl this time, but next time, make sure to have a boy. We're counting on you." You're acting like Emily doesn't even exist. Did you come here just to say that? That's not it. We're simply hoping for a male heir for the family. Whether it's a boy or a girl, as long as the child is healthy, that's all that matters. Evan, the furious, was stopped by me tugging on his sleeve. "I'm sorry for not meeting your expectations, Sean, Caddy." Marcia, make sure to reflect on this and have a proper boy next time. Though, given your age, we're not expecting much. With those words, my parents-in-law left the hospital room. They have no idea what they're talking about. I'm sorry. You have nothing to apologize for, Marcia. The way my parents-in-law treated me and Emily was deeply hurtful. However, Evan's empathy and support were my only solace. Despite this, my parents-in-law continued to disregard me and Emily at every opportunity. Caddy seemed to think that not having a son was a disgrace to the family. When it came time to introduce newborn Emily to the relatives, one of them congratulated me. Caddy quickly interrupted. "Unfortunately, it's not a boy. By the way, are we good on food? We should prepare more beer since more guests will arrive." She diverted the topic away from Emily and me. "Please, stay out of sight in front of the relatives. The room next door is empty, so go play with Emily there." Caddy treated us like nuisances, physically distancing us from the family. 3 years passed, and Evan began to change. He used to be supportive, but now he was coming home late and often absent even on his days off, citing work as the reason. Initially, I accepted it as part of his busy job, but his behavior towards Emily also grew cold. One evening, as the front door opened, "Dad's home! Dad's home!" Emily dropped her picture book and ran to hug Evan's legs. Previously, "Hey, Emily. I'm home. Were you a good girl?" Evan would have smiled and lifted her up. But recently, without a hint of a smile, he said, "I'm tired. Marcia, take care of Emily." He forcibly removed Emily, who clung to his legs. Unfazed. "Dad, hug me." Emily persisted. "Be quiet. You're giving me a headache. If you don't behave, I'll throw you out." Emily, shocked by her beloved dad's harsh words, burst into tears. There, it's okay. Don't be scared." After she calmed down, I looked at Evan. "Whatever's happening at work, you shouldn't take it out on Emily." "Shut up! What do you know? Don't speak to me like that until you've given me a son." Evan had changed so much in the past 3 years that I could hardly recognize him. "Why are you saying things like that? You sound just like Caddy." "I've come to realize that my mom was right about everything once I had a child of my own." With a sigh, Evan loosened his tie. "I don't need dinner. I'm going out." He left the house without even changing clothes. Dad, where did he go? Is it because I was a bad girl? No, sweetie. Dad loves you more than anything in the world. Was it the stress from work? I kept telling myself it was just a phase, but his attitude never softened. Instead, Evan started taking out his frustrations on me as well, despite my busy days filled with housework, childcare, and part-time work. Exhausted from parenting, I began to consider divorce due to the changes in Evan. "Emily, do you love Dad?" "I love Dad. But I love you too, Mom." "Mom, don't you love Dad?" Looking into Emily's clear, innocent eyes, I couldn't bring myself to divorce him. I hoped he would return to his former self and that someday we could reconcile with my parents-in-law. But Evan's behavior only worsened, and our relationship with my PIL remained strained. Evan's absence became routine, and even on Emily's 5th birthday, he didn't contact us. Dad's at work again? Sitting in front of her birthday cake, her eyes were filled with sadness. Yes, sweetie. He loves you so much that he's working hard to make you happy. He is amazing. Here, this is a present from Dad. I handed her a teddy bear that I had bought myself. It's so cute. I'm glad Dad is my dad. By this time, Evan had stopped depositing most of his salary into our bank account. Worse, the balance was gradually decreasing without my knowledge. Could he really be? My distrust of Evan grew day by day. Fearing that our life might be disrupted, I made several promises with Emily. Turn off the lights when they're not in use. Go to bed by 9 p.m. If she wanted to read a book, we would borrow it from the library together. By cutting down on expenses and increasing my part-time work without neglecting childcare, I managed to stretch our budget as far as possible. Mom, are you okay? You look tired. I didn't think I was overexerting myself, but I must have been frowning without realizing it. I forced a smile. I'm fine, Emily. Don't worry. When I patted her head, she gave an awkward smile, even more so than mine, and said, I'm glad. Seeing her like that, I felt deeply inadequate as a mother for causing her such worry. Around this time, Caddy started helping with Emily's pickup and drop-off when I couldn't manage due to my part-time job. I'm sorry, Caddy. Don't worry about it. Emily is our precious granddaughter, after all. What had caused this change of heart? Caddy, who had once openly avoided me, and Emily, now seemed different. Despite my unease, I had no choice but to accept her help. One Sunday morning, after cleaning up breakfast, I suggested, Mom doesn't have work today, so how about we go out somewhere? I wanted to bring back Emily's natural smile. Emily ran up to me, her eyes sparkling. Mom, Dad is off work today too, right? Can we go out to eat, the three of us? I'm fine with that, but... I glanced at Evan, who was sitting on the living room sofa, reading the newspaper. Dad, please? Can we go out to eat, just the three of us? I'm tired. If you two want to go out, just go without me. Please? Just this once, Dad. I want to go out with both you and Mom. Reluctantly, Evan, unable to refuse his daughter's earnest plea, agreed. All right then, just for today. He sighed lightly, folding his newspaper. Emily seemed to have a particular place in mind. I heard from Lily. That cafe where you and Mom used to go a lot. Take us there. Lily is a former colleague from the company I used to work for, who still visits us occasionally after I left my job to get married. Such unnecessary meddling. Evan clicked his tongue softly while gripping the steering wheel. Dad and Mom, you two were really close before I was born, right? How would you know? Do you even remember? How could I remember something from so long ago? Evan ended the conversation abruptly, but I found myself smiling at the old memories. Look, Mom's smiling. Emily noticed, and I shyly covered my face with both hands. That's creepy. Why are you blushing? Evan's scolding wiped away the nostalgic feelings in an instant. When we arrived at the cafe, there was a reserved sign on a windowside table. Emily tugged my hand. This way. And she rushed over. Emily, that table is reserved. When I called Lily earlier, she made a reservation for us. I couldn't help but laugh at Emily's excitement. Evan, however, seemed uninterested in his daughter's effort, his eyes glued to his mobile phone. After we sat down, a waiter brought 2 large puddings to our table. 15 years ago, when Evan and I were dating, we used to visit this cafe and enjoy these puddings. Seeing the unchanged $2 puddings, both in shape and size, brought a smile to my face. Doesn't this pudding remind you of our younger days? Evan didn't even glance at the pudding, engrossed in his phone. Speaking of which, it's been exactly 15 years since we got married. As soon as I said it, something struck me. I quickly checked the date on my phone. Could it be that today is? Dad, Mom. Happy 15th wedding anniversary. I felt a warm glow in my chest from the unexpected surprise from my daughter. Thank you, Emily. But even though there were 3 of us at the table, the third pudding never seemed to arrive no matter how long we waited. It's taking a while. Emily, go ahead and eat this pudding. Emily shook her head vigorously. This is for you, Mom. Today is your wedding anniversary, so I'm not eating. I paid for it myself. I tilted my head in confusion at her words. Emily, where did you get the money? I had never given her an allowance. Grandma gave it to me. She said it was a reward for cleaning the bathroom and the yard. After I got home from preschool, I cleaned her house every day and saved up. Isn't that impressive? Emily proudly puffed out her chest, but I felt a sense of unease. Did you want to do that yourself? Or did she tell you to do it? I wanted to give you 2 a present for their anniversary. Caddy said if I wanted that, I should clean the house. I really wanted to eat the pudding too, but the store clerk said I only had enough money for 2. Next time, I'll save enough to buy 3. Seeing Emily's eyes sparkle with determination, I felt more sadness than joy. Dad, Mom, please stay happy together forever. Emily's earnest wish made it impossible for me to hold back my tears. Even though she was so young, she had noticed the strain in my relationship with Evan. No matter how much he avoided her and me, to Emily, he was the only dad in the world. For her, it was only natural to want her parents to get along. Realizing how much strain I had put on Emily made me feel deeply ashamed. Emily, I really appreciate your feelings. But you should eat this pudding. No. It's not mine. It's your pudding. Why won't you eat it? Emily's face started to crumple as if she was about to cry, and I hurriedly tried to soothe her. I'm sorry. This is Mom's pudding. I took a spoonful and put it in my mouth. It's delicious. The pudding that Emily treated me to is so delicious. Seeing my beaming smile, Emily finally looked satisfied and smiled back. I ate half of the pudding and then slid the plate over to Emily. It was so delicious. Mom's full now, so you can have the rest. Oh, all right. Emily began eating the remaining pudding. She must have really wanted to eat it herself. But she had restrained herself for our wedding anniversary. I felt so grateful that she had grown into such a kind-hearted girl. Emily is growing up in ways we don't even realize, I said absent-mindedly, glancing at Evan. Evan, however, was still engrossed in his mobile phone, having pushed the pudding to the edge of the table without touching it. Why don't you eat a little? She went out of her way to treat us, I suggested. If you want it, you eat it. I'm not in the mood right now, he replied curtly. His indifferent response made me doubt my ears. Didn't you hear what Emily said? Yeah, I heard her. Something about our wedding anniversary. Sorry, I was thinking about other things, he said, handing the pudding to Emily. Did you really think adults would be thrilled with something as sweet as pudding? Here, Emily. You should eat it. You don't have to say it like that. You should appreciate her kindness, I snapped. Well, I'd be much happier sleeping at home than being treated to this pudding, he retorted. I couldn't contain my anger at his utter lack of appreciation for Emily. Is that how you talk to your daughter? Evan didn't seem to hear my question, his eyes still glued to his phone. Dad, do you hate me? Emily asked, tears welling up in her eyes. Sorry, Dad's busy right now. Don't bother me, Evan replied dismissively. Do you want to go home? Emily asked, her voice trembling. Yeah, let's go home, he said, standing up without a care in the world. How could he not notice his daughter's feelings? Emily doesn't need a dad like that. My feelings for Evan chilled dramatically. Back home, Emily remained downcast. Something Evan was too absorbed in his phone to notice. I opened the drawer in my room and slipped the savings I'd been accumulating for emergencies into my handbag, then rushed out of the house and headed to a detective agency in the next town. A month later, I was called by the detective and informed of a certain fact. He is definitely having an affair. Spread across the desk were dozens of photos showing Evan enjoying meals with a young woman and entering and leaving hotels. So, it was that after all. Some part of me had always been prepared for this. Seeing those photos didn't shake me. What surprised me most was that his infidelity involved multiple women. It seems he didn't have a specific partner. He used dating apps and social media to meet women indiscriminately, with most encounters ending after just one meeting. Still, the fact remained that Evan had betrayed Emily and me. I immediately went to pick Emily up from kindergarten and headed straight to the train station instead of going home. I called my dad, Neil, and my mom, Rosie, explaining the situation and asking if we could stay with them for a while. Aren't we going home? Neil and Rosie are waiting for us. They're excited to see you, Emily. What about Dad? I couldn't bring myself to answer her question. Upon arriving at my parents' house, I mailed the completed divorce papers to Evan. Hey, what do you mean by divorce? 3 days later, Evan called after receiving the divorce papers. It means exactly what it says. Don't be ridiculous. Bring Emily and come back right now. Neither Emily nor I have any intention of returning to your house ever again. Evan, not considering his own actions, started to blame Emily and me. Just cancel the divorce. If you come back now, I'll forgive this whole thing. Hang up and come home immediately. Understand? Are you finished? What? I already know about your multiple meetings with other women. The evidence is overwhelming. His voice became panicked on the other end of the line. It's not just the infidelity. What I find unforgivable is your attitude towards Emily. What did I ever do to her? For years now, you haven't contributed your salary to the household. Moreover, you've been withdrawing large sums from our joint bank account every month. Did you think I wouldn't notice? That account was meant for her future, as we agreed. How could you touch that money? I just borrowed a bit. I was going to put it back soon. He quickly made excuses, but the amounts were too large and the period too long to be a mere loan. You were buying expensive brand name gifts for the women you liked, weren't you? I know everything. I have nothing more to say to you. Just then, Emily came over and leaned toward the phone. I hate you, Dad. Goodbye. Emily? Tomorrow, we can go to the amusement park together. Evan continued to say something, but I hung up and immediately blocked his number. Evan and my parents-in-law refused to accept the divorce, so we had to go to court. His reason for rejecting the divorce wasn't because he still had feelings for Emily or me, but because he cared about appearances. However, the evidence of Evan's infidelity gathered by the detective was decisive, and the court fully recognized my claims. Ironically, his affair started when he was researching fertility treatments. He came across an ad for a dating app on social media. Out of curiosity, he checked it out and found a woman he liked. What began as light messaging to relieve stress escalated until he couldn't stop himself, eventually meeting the women in person. I never realized how much fun meeting different women could be. He confessed bitterly when he realized he had lost. I was awarded full custody of Emily, and she is now living peacefully at my parents' house under their loving care. Caddy's habit of making a 5-year-old do household chores had already become a neighborhood rumor. It was reported that she forced her to redo the cleaning, even if a single leaf was left in the yard, making Emily cry. Learning that Caddy had used Emily as a servant, under the pretense of being kind, brought me to tears. The divorce further tarnished the reputation of my parents-in-law, who were already struggling under the weight of their actions. Despite the cold looks they received at work, they had to continue to pay the alimony and child support. On the other hand, my parents Neil and Rosie adore Emily. Emily will be a first grader soon. How about we go look for a school bag this Saturday? Or would you prefer the aquarium? Let's make pot au feu tonight with the vegetables Neil harvested. Emily loves it, right? Eat as much as you want. Initially, Emily would sometimes cry, missing her dad, but now my parents do everything they can to bring out her genuine smile. As a result, her no longer forces herself to smile just to cheer me up. She now shows her pure, innocent smile from the bottom of her heart. Watching her radiant smile, I am determined to protect her pure and kind heart. Your son made me pregnant. Excuse me? Pay $30,000 as alimony. When I picked up the restaurant's phone, I was told that with a young woman's voice suddenly. She was utterly one-sided in the conversation and not even giving her name. I completely underestimated that must be a prank call. So I never expected that this call would lead to such a mess. My name is Melissa Brown. This may sound self-flattering, but I run a popular restaurant somewhere in New York City. We have been featured on national television and in magazines, and thanks to that almost every seat for lunch and dinner is booked every day. However, because of being famous, nuisance calls and aggressive sales pitches increased. So I got quite sloppy with this call because I thought it was just another prank. But when I was told over the phone to my restaurant that got pregnant, I was actually taken aback and I could hardly understand what she was saying. I do have a son, but the thought of him getting someone pregnant seemed absurd. Yet this prank call with its shocking accusations intrigued me. I decided to listen to her story for a bit out of fun. I had an abortion. What are you going to do about the wounds on my body and soul? Pay for the surgery too. First off, if I may ask who I am speaking to? Even when dealing with prank calls, one of the challenges of the service industry is having to respond politely. It would be a nuisance if our conversation were recorded and exaggerated with false information being spread around. I'm a customer at your restaurant. Is that the first thing you have to say to me after your son hurt me? Your family lacks both common sense and compassion. I find it hard to believe my son would do such a thing. My staff in the kitchen and at the counter glance over at me as they sense this isn't a usual dinner reservation call. I smiled and waved at them to make them feel safe and assuring them that everything is all right. Your son assaulted me on a dark street. And you recognized him in the dark? Of course. But are you sure it was my son? Don't play dumb. I'm absolutely certain. It was your son who lives with you. I've been so scared since then, I even can't go out alone. What are you going to do about this? She started detailing how the assault had happened. I think you might be mistaking my son for someone else. But this seems like a serious matter. Can we meet in person to discuss it? Most people who make prank calls like these tend to shy away from meeting face to face. So suggesting a meeting is a good way to get them to back down. In the beginning, I was merely entertaining her call out of fun, but as it seemed to be dragging on, I proposed the meeting to end the call soon. You saying, meet with the criminal's parent? How dare you suggest that kind of thing to a victim? But I'd like to verify your story in person. Are you saying I'm lying? That's not what I mean. To be honest, I wanted to say you're lying, aren't you? But I held back. Then she started berating me and saying, I can't believe a person like you is a business owner. Why don't we meet and talk about this anyway? No matter how many times I suggested it, she continually refused to meet. I see. So what do you want me to do? Pay me alimony. $30,000. But it's a case of mistaken identity anyways, and also I can't afford such a large amount of money. You can pay. I know your business is thriving. Pay it or I'll sue you. Even though my business is thriving, it's just a small place and $30,000 is a large amount of money and I don't even intend to pay. Are you sure you want to involve the police? I don't mind. At my unhesitant response, the woman fell silent for a moment. If my son truly did such a thing, I should hold him accountable as a parent. But I don't think he did. You're pretty confident he didn't do it, huh? Maybe you should have some doubts about your own son. I would believe it if there was evidence. Do you have any? Evidence? I'd be troubled if you asked me for money without any proof. There was silence on the other end of the phone as the woman seemed to be contemplating something. If there's no proof, I'm hanging up. I said that and trying to end the call, then. Hold on. If there's evidence, you'll pay the alimony, right? Well, I would consider it. Then wait. I'll bring the evidence. With that, she hung up the phone almost as soon as she had finished speaking. Owner, are you all right? There's no problem. It's just a prank call. One of my employees, Mr. Murphy, voiced his concern, so I reassured him like that. There's no way she has any proof, so I don't expect she'll call back again. But I have an uneasy feeling that she might barge in and cause a scene at the restaurant. In the evening, while preparing for dinner, I had completely forgotten about the phone call. Mr. Murphy ran up to me, holding a manila envelope in his hand with his face as pale as a ghost. What's the matter? It's not like you to run in the restaurant. Owner, this came. What he handed me was a letter. Ms. Melissa Brown. I was assaulted and impregnated by your son. Please transfer $30,000 as alimony. Written below were the bank transfer details and the recipient's name was Karen Williams. Mr. Murphy was pale and disturbed because he was the first to see the contents of the unsealed and unsigned letter. Calm down. But you know my son, right? Hearing this, he seemed relieved. There was something else in the envelope. I pulled it out and it was a pregnancy test. What's that? This commotion attracted the other employees. All of them seemed taken aback. Could it really be the owner's son? Some employees gave me a contemptuous look, but they were quickly convinced when I explained. I put away the things that had been sent on my desk and returned to my usual work. A few days passed without transferring any money, but during this time there was an unsettling incident. Owner, this came again. Mr. Murphy came with the manila envelope in his hand and looking fed up. I see. Check the contents and put it away in the usual place. Recently, these harassing letters had been dropped in the restaurant's mailbox many times a day. Are you planning to run? Pay up. The owner is a parent of a criminal. Her son got a college girl pregnant and didn't even apologize. The owner of this restaurant is a heartless and cruel woman with no sincerity. Irresponsible, overprotective, toxic parent. It's your fault your son became like that. Take responsibility. I'll make sure no customers come to this restaurant. It's for the good of the world, for the good of the people. I wonder what would make customers stop coming to a restaurant. Like those restaurants where they put that greasy, black, and disgusting thing in the food. I wouldn't go there again, that's for sure. The content escalates progressively and the last part is practically a threat. Thankfully, no claims have been made that anything is actually in our food. But the constant anxiety that we might be set up is exhausting. Amid all this, something caught my attention. Well, again, a vacant seat increased at lunch. The number of customers was just gradually decreasing. Yes, it's unusual. Today we even had 2 tables empty. My thoughts went out to the poor ingredients waiting to be prepared in the kitchen. Owner! I looked up at Mr. Murphy's call to see him heading my way with his laptop. Look at this review site! On the laptop screen, the latest reviews were filled with harsh, slanderous comments. Bad customer service. They don't listen to the customers. Especially the owner who seems to be getting full of herself after appearing on TV and in magazines. The food is getting worse. The soup taste was way more plain than the last time I visited. I saw an employee drop a piece of meat before grilling and sneak it back. Every single day poor reviews were posted, causing our star rating to plummet. I realized that I was shaking with anger. It's unacceptable. Why should this restaurant, which we've worked so hard to build with the intention of pleasing our customers, be wounded by such baseless accusations? Are the preparations progressing? An unfamiliarly low and cold voice involuntarily slipped from my mouth. Yes, they're almost completed. Upon hearing Mr. Murphy's response, I couldn't help but smirk. It's been a week since we discovered the slanderous comments on the review site. Since then, the number of customers has continued to dwindle. When I stepped out into the dining area, Mr. Anderson, a regular, was sitting at the counter next to a young woman. Mr. Anderson, thank you as always. It's tough for you lately, Melissa. When I greeted him, Mr. Anderson offered me words of consolation. Well, this job is my lifeline. I smiled and replied. Mr. Anderson shook his head sympathetically then. You're strong. Especially considering your son's predicament. But don't lose hope. I'm on your side, Melissa. We'll support your son as he atones for his actions. What? I was taken aback and couldn't understand what he was talking about. Well, I noticed this place is quieter than usual, so I was wondering what happened. Then this young lady here kindly showed me a web page about this restaurant. With that, he gestured towards the pretty woman in her early 20s sitting next to him. I really feel for you. I love this place, so I thought I'd come here more often to help out in any way I can. Come to think of it, I recalled seeing this girl in the restaurant quite frequently recently. Excuse me, but what's written here is a misunderstanding. The regulars here were wondering why the place has been so empty recently. So I explained it to them. What? I doubted my own ears and trying to make sense of what she was saying. I mean, isn't it sad not to know the truth? Besides, I thought the owner would be happy to know that people like me and Mr. Anderson still come to this place. You've been spreading online rumors which we're not even sure of to our patrons? I unintentionally raised my voice, forgetting all about formality. Wow, it's scary. The internet says the owner is a terrible person and I thought it wasn't true. But it seems you really are like the parent of a man who assaulted women. I suggest that you should apologize if you think you did something wrong. She twisted away from me. Her movements were as if she expected me to punch her even though I had not raised a hand. Miss, that's not a nice way to talk. Melissa is probably tired from all the things happening. Mr. Anderson defended me, but that wasn't the point. I was about to explain that the fundamental issue was different than suddenly her bag fell from the back of her chair. It must have moved while she was twisting and turning. Despite my simmering rage towards her, my service industry instinct kicked in and I moved to pick up her bag. But then I saw it. Karen Williams. The name written on the student ID card that had fallen out stopped me in my tracks. No worries, I'll pick it up myself. She hurriedly got off her chair to pick up her bag and ID, but I got there first. Hey, give it back. But it wasn't a mistake. That name was the one on that letter with a pregnancy test, which wouldn't serve as evidence of anything. So it was you. I've been looking for you, Karen Williams. I must have swapped it with a friend's by mistake. I'm not Karen. Your face and the one on the ID are the same. Interesting. So you're a student at Central College. No, I'm telling you, you're mistaken. Beside her, who started being flustered, Mr. Anderson was clearly puzzled and having no idea what was going on. I'm going to sue you. My words spoken in front of a few scattered patrons caused everyone in the bar to turn around. What? What did I do? I believe you're the one who knows really well what you did. Since we're all here, why don't we let everyone hear? I looked around the bar. It was mostly filled with regulars. While it's nice to have regulars, it meant that almost no new customers were coming in. I couldn't help but feel furious about this young woman disrupting our business. Let me start. Are you the one who called claiming my son assaulted you and impregnated you? Demanding alimony? I glared at her and pressing her for an answer. Yes, that's me. I'm the one your son assaulted. Seeing that there was no way to deny it anymore, she admitted it surprisingly readily. What? You want to embarrass me in front of all these people? This could backfire, you know, considering the reputation of your bar. She crossed her arms defiantly and completely brazen. Her attitude only served to fuel my anger further. Mr. Murphy, bring everything over. I instructed him to hurry up and bring me a laptop from the store's office along with a stack of envelopes and documents that could be about 4 inches high. Was it you who kept sending harassing letters to the store over and over again? I read some of the letters in a loud voice so that other customers in the store can hear. Pay up or run. This owner is a criminal's parent. Her son impregnates a college girl and doesn't even apologize. Poor souls being forced to eat food from this woman's restaurant. I'm sure I'm going to make customers not come to the store. It's for the greater good. Some were covering their mouths at the harsh words among the regulars who heard the content. This is completely threatening. There's no evidence that I sent this letter. Maybe some outsider who heard the rumors sent it just for fun. As she was desperately making excuses, I silently opened my laptop and presented her with the screen of another review site. Some of you here may have seen this the defamation on this review site. You did this too, right? I'm saying, where is the evidence? Are you all right in the head? Evidence, evidence. You seem to love evidence so much. Even though the one you presented is such a mess. I showed the first received letter and the pregnancy test to Mr. Anderson, who was nearby. This is the pregnancy test she brought as evidence. What do you think? Isn't this red line just a marker? Even my old eyes can see that. The customers who were listening started to buzz. But this might not prove that I was assaulted, but it doesn't prove that I'm wrong either. No matter what happens, she is insisting and shouting angrily that she is the victim. I was assaulted by your son. He said it himself. It's disrespectful to doubt that. The customers are whispering in hushed tones and seems not sure whom to believe. Since I, the victim, am saying it, it must be absolutely true. She started to cry as if to attract sympathy. Well, I'll prove it then. My son, he's 3 years old yet. Upon hearing this decisive fact, she let out a small "What?" as if deflated. My son may be a bit rambunctious and strong for a 3-year-old, but there's no way he could assault you. No way. I know you have a big son. You live together, right? I even have a picture. I heard you talking about dinner. Saying that, she pulled out her smartphone and showed a picture of what looked like a young man talking to me at the back door of the store. Oh, isn't that Taylor? See. You do have 2 sons. Perhaps regaining confidence from correctly naming the person in the photo, her tone increased. That's not correct. I immediately denied what she said. Then who is this person? Don't tell me he's your lover? Having an affair with a younger guy and then that guy impregnates a college girl, what a scandal. Not only is your store done for, but your marriage too. To her triumphant words, I revealed something. This is my niece. Your niece? Yes, and actually it's a girl. I explained that my niece is tomboyish and is often mistaken for a boy even as an adult. She's a college student, and as she boards at my place, I ask her to cook dinner and pick up my son as a form of rent payment. If you need evidence, want me to bring her in person for you to check? I told this to her, who stood there shocked and seemingly unable to hear me. By the way, I've already gathered all the evidence about the harassment letter and the posts on the review site. Evidence? No way. She seemed like she might collapse any second and turned to face me weakly. I've already consulted with the police and my attorney. I explained step by step the preparations I've made with the help of Mr. Murphy, one of my employees. The first piece of evidence was a letter from her with fingerprints that matched those found on the harassment letter. All posts on the review site were confirmed to be from the same person after a disclosure request. With no way out, she sunk to the floor as she drained. You were just saying that it's better to apologize quickly if you've done something wrong, weren't you? She mumbled something while looking pale and looking down, but I couldn't make out whether it was an apology. I will contact the police about you. I'll inform your parents and your college as well. Be prepared for a lawsuit for emotional distress damages. No, please don't do that. I'm still a student. Please spare me. You may be a student, but you're an adult, over 18 years old. You will take responsibility for your actions. I can't handle that. Please, stop. Subsequently, I filed a criminal complaint against Karen Williams for defamation and business obstruction, as well as for damages to the shop. Apparently, she had always been a big spender, buying brand bags and clothes on credit, and ended up committing these crimes after she was unable to make her payments. As a result, she was expelled from her college. This incident even made the news, and I've heard that now she is the one who has been receiving harassments after her personal information was exposed. Through my lawyer, all the slanderous posts on the review site were deleted. The uproar unexpectedly turned into a positive result as it cleared up the misunderstandings among my regular customers. Now the number of customers has returned to normal. While the incident did deter new customers, there were almost no regulars who left, even despite all the lies that Karen had been spreading. There's no doubt that it was pleasing to know that her claims weren't taken at face value. Moving forward, I aim to continue running the restaurant to meet the trust of my customers. Standing is common sense for a daughter-in-law. I had been preparing food and welcoming guests since the morning at a family gathering. Being 9 months pregnant, I was taking a short break on the sofa in the back. When my mother-in-law, Susan, found me sitting, her expression changed drastically as she approached me and snapped those words. "Susan, I'm sorry. I'm just having some discomfort in my stomach." Unable to stand due to the pain, I apologized while remaining seated on the sofa. As I struggled to get up, Susan, seeming to give up, turned to leave but then shockingly kicked my stomach. "Susan, how could you?" I immediately curled up to protect my stomach, and fortunately, I didn't feel much pain. "It's your useless body that's the problem." This was a line I was all too familiar with after always being oppressed, but I was left speechless by the shock of being kicked in the stomach. Someone, who had been silently watching this scene, waited until Susan was seated, and then. "My name is Anne. I'm a 32-year-old housewife. I live happily with my husband Tom and our 3-year-old son. I am currently 9 months pregnant with our second child. Before the pregnancy was confirmed, it was decided that Tom would be transferred to work abroad alone. Although Tom insisted on staying in America, I didn't want him to give up his dream of working overseas, a goal since our dating days. After I encouraged him to the end, he promised to go abroad for just 3 years, and then he left. While I felt joy in supporting my husband's dream, there was one concern. The insidious harassment from Susan and Mike, my father-in-law. While Tom was around, they adored us, but in his absence, they subjected me to daily verbal abuse. Since Susan and Mike were kind in front of Tom, I always tried to bring him along. But for the next 3 years, I'll have to endure their malicious harassment alone, which is disheartening. However, I couldn't discuss it with Tom, knowing it would only add to his worries and considering Susan's feelings towards her son. Initially, I tried to please them by complying with everything, but no matter what, I only faced their resentment. All I want is to get along with Mike and Susan. Desiring a peaceful relationship with Susan and Mike, one day, I finally broke down and decided to be submissive. Then I heard shocking words from them. "You stole our precious son from us." That's what Susan declared. "Ever since you married our son, he hardly pays any attention to us." I finally understood the root of their relentless harassment. Susan and Mike were so overly fond of their son that they were jealous of me, his wife. "If that's the case, I can always come with him." Startled by Susan's unexpected confession, I tried to find a solution and offered various suggestions. "The best thing would be for you to leave our son alone." "Right. Then he might return his love to us." I was stunned by Susan's wish. The thought of them wanting a divorce because they felt their son's affection for them had diminished gave me chills. And this distorted expression of their love even scared me. "Don't you like the idea of your son building a new family?" I asked tentatively. "New family? That's ridiculous. Our family is enough. No matter how old our son gets." Realizing the extraordinary love they had for their only son, my husband, I was speechless. "I love my husband. I want to get along with you and Susan, but I have no intention of leaving him." Normally quiet, this was one point I could not concede. Seeing my resolve, Susan scoffed and retorted. "Are you so confident that no matter how we treat you, you won't leave?" From that day on, their harassment only intensified instead of diminishing. At one point, Knowing I was allergic to shrimp, they sneakily added it to the fried food. I was about to eat it when my husband, who always harped on about my allergy, noticed and warned me. Shrimp? I'm sorry. Actually, this was a gift. I forgot you can't have shrimp. Susan apologized to me repeatedly, making excuses. My husband seemed satisfied and asked her to be more careful in the future. But even as they spoke, Susan was stepping on my foot under the table. Amidst such harassment, we were leading a peaceful life when my husband's transfer overseas was confirmed. Susan and the others turned pale with shock as I celebrated. Overseas. That's going to be hard on the child and Anne, right? My father-in-law, Mike, really just not wanting to be separated from them, used me as an excuse. My husband said it was a decision we made together, and I knew the anger would soon be directed at me. And, did you even consider my grandchild's feelings? Unsatisfied with my decision, Susan interrogated me like it was an inquisition. Fed up, my husband finally spoke out. Both of you, enough. Working abroad has always been my dream. And is just supporting me in that. He immediately defended me. We support you too. But now just isn't the right time, is it? Mike seemed a bit sorry, yet unable to agree. That's right. The grandchild is only 3 years old. It's too much for Anne. Susan, for once, seemed to be on my side, using my name in her argument. I'm fine. Tom and I have discussed it and decided to go for it. I spoke up, my voice trembling slightly, trying to act bravely so my husband wouldn't worry. Realizing our determination, Susan and Mike reluctantly accepted it, though with a sense of defeat. That night, feeling sorry towards Susan and Mike, my husband suggested we all have dinner together. I had been avoiding eating with them since the shrimp allergy incident, but I decided to endure it for my husband's sake. Then let us, the ladies, get busy preparing in the kitchen. You relax. Susan, excited to cook for her son after a long time, went into the kitchen. Hesitant to be alone with her, I steeled myself and followed her to the kitchen. Aren't you afraid our son might leave you when he returns from abroad? Susan's words, still hoping for our breakup, drained the blood from my face. Realizing it was pointless to engage, I silently started preparing. While we were working on different ingredients, Susan called out to me. And that pot over there is cool. Could you take it to the table? Busy with preparations, I followed Susan's instructions and grabbed the pot handle with my bare hands, only to let go immediately from the scorching heat. A pot of steaming hot beef stew fell right at my feet. I burned my hands and feet. Hearing my scream, my husband and Susan rushed over. And, did you touch it with your bare hands? I told you to be careful of burns. What should we do now? Susan pretended to panic, but did nothing. My husband, seeing this, quickly instructed to bring a towel and ice. He also told Mike to call an ambulance. Seeing my red, swollen hands and feet, I could only cry in pain and frustration, clinging to my husband. Thanks to his quick thinking, I received proper treatment at the hospital and was told it would take 2 weeks to heal. Slowly, my spirit was breaking from Susan's escalating insidious bullying. As time passed and my husband's departure overseas approached, I made sure to avoid Susan and the others completely. Despite their vengeful attempts to visit our home or call multiple times a day, I never responded. For their excuses to see their grandchild, I sent pictures with messages. To my husband, I told him the reason for not seeing Susan was because of severe pregnancy symptoms, which he understood. Half a year passed, and the annual family gathering, highly valued by my husband's family, drew near. Knowing its importance, and though my husband said I didn't have to attend, I decided to go. I informed Susan of my attendance in advance through a message. Her reply, seemingly eager to finally vent her frustrations on me, brought back the flashbacks of my burn injury accident and filled me with more fear. Then, the day arrived when everyone was to gather. I briefly greeted Susan and Mike, then spent most of my time with relatives of my age, keeping my distance. Standing is common sense for a daughter-in-law. I had been preparing meals and welcoming guests since the morning at the family gathering. Being 9 months pregnant, I took a rest on a sofa in the back. When Susan saw me sitting, she changed her expression and came over to me, throwing those words at me. "Susan, I'm sorry. I'm just having some discomfort in my stomach." Unable to stand due to the pain, I apologized but couldn't get up from the sofa. Seeing that I couldn't stand, Susan, seeming to give up, turned to leave, but then shockingly, she turned back and kicked my stomach. "Susan, how could you?" I immediately curled up to protect my stomach, and luckily, the pain was minimal. "It's your useless body that's at fault." I was used to being oppressed by her, but I was left speechless and shocked by being kicked. Someone, who had been silently watching this scene, waited until Susan was seated, and then, "Mom, what did you just do to an on the sofa?" Someone shouted loudly, making everyone, including me, turn towards the voice. There stood my husband, who was supposed to be overseas for work. "Tom." Susan uttered his name in a trembling voice. Painfully, I stood up from the sofa and slowly moved towards my husband. "What did you do to and just now?" he asked Susan, with an expression I had never seen before. "Tom, why are you here?" Until the previous day, my husband had apologized over the phone, saying he couldn't get a long leave and wouldn't be able to attend. I couldn't ask him to accompany me, knowing he had just been transferred overseas. Anne. I came back to surprise everyone. Tom's face softened as he looked at me, his expression changing completely from before. He rushed over to me, hugged me around my shoulders, and supported me. "But when I came back, I happened to see Mom and you having that interaction from the entrance." He had been frozen for a while, not understanding the situation as he had never seen Susan like that before. "I was about to ask and what happened when Mom kicked her." Hearing this, I realized he had witnessed Susan kicking my stomach. Looking up at my husband, I could see the anger in his eyes. "Tom, this is..." Relatives started gathering in the room, sensing the unusual tension, making the situation even more strained. "Tom, everyone is here, let's talk in the other room." Susan tried to calm my husband with a quiet voice, attempting to defuse the situation. "And you don't need to say anything. I want to hear it directly from Mom." Saying this, my husband turned his face towards Susan again. "No, let's hear it here, in front of everyone." The relatives, stunned by my husband's raised voice, watched the unfolding situation in silence. The commotion got Mike and Mike's brother's attention, who had organized the family gathering. "What's all this commotion about?" Seeing the unusual situation, Mike hurried to Susan's side. Upon realizing his beloved son was there in front of him, Mike looked even more shocked. "Dad, it's been a while. I didn't want our reunion to be like this, but I just saw something unbelievable." With Mike's presence, my husband regained some composure and continued in a calm voice. "What happened?" Mike looked slightly uneasy. He already knew Susan had done something to me. Having always turned a blind eye to Susan's bullying, he was part of it too. "It was just, and I were talking." Susan stubbornly refused to admit she had kicked me, trying to get out of this situation. However, my husband quietly glared at her, wanting her to confess. Sensing the conversation wasn't progressing, I finally spoke up. "You kicked me in the stomach, didn't you?" I finally revealed in front of everyone that Susan had kicked my stomach. Hearing this, the relatives began murmuring. "And what an accusation! I would never do such a thing!" Susan shouted, flustered. "Never, what, Mom? I saw it with my own eyes." My husband expressed his frustration and anger at Susan's denial and her true nature. As he seemed about to confront Susan, I urged him desperately to stay calm. "Tom, are you sure it wasn't a misunderstanding? Susan doing such a thing." Mike continued to defend Susan until the end. Hearing this, my husband's suspicion only deepened. "Dad, even now, you're siding with Mom?" My husband was speechless at Mike's attitude, seemingly more afraid of Susan facing critical judgment than the fact she had kicked me. "Tom, I could only hold his hand tightly. The ease with which his parents dismissed their daughter-in-law raised my husband's suspicions, bringing up a question in his mind. Anne, this isn't the first time, is it? My husband's intuition seemed to pick up on something from Susan's behavior. Trying not to worry him, I felt both frustrated and relieved that my strongest ally had finally appeared, bringing tears to my eyes. Realizing this wasn't the first incident, my husband asked, "Mom, what terrible things have you done to Anne?" His anger not subsiding but intensifying. The relatives intervened to stop Tom as he approached Susan and Mike. "Tell everyone here what pain you've caused, Anne." As Susan heard this, her face turned pale, and she collapsed to the ground. "Tom, it's too harsh to treat Susan like this in her condition." Mike began to show anger towards Tom. "Harsh? Then what about that burn?" Susan and I were shocked, as if our thoughts had paused for a moment. And the one who raised his voice upon hearing this was, surprisingly, Mike's brother. "And was burned?" Mike's brother, who had been quietly observing what he thought was a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law issue, spoke up for the first time, surprised by the unexpected development. "It seemed strange to me that day, and got a severe burn holding a pot of just done beef stew with her bare hands." My husband had been troubled by the fact that I had done something I would never normally do, and would always check if it's safe before handling a pot with her bare hands if it were her own decision. I always had a habit of double-checking everything, whether it was cooking or leaving the house, which my husband knew well. So, it seemed odd to him that I would grab the pot without thinking. "The beef stew was made by Mom. Did she say something at that time?" As he pressed for answers, Susan and Mike fell silent. Some relatives defended Susan, while others expressed disbelief. I decided to reveal everything. "That time, Susan said it was cool, right?" I repeated Susan's words with courage. I explained how I was busy with my own cooking preparations that day and took Susan's words at face value without checking the pot. "I regret not verifying and ended up getting burned." I admitted my mistake. Hearing this, Susan's expression changed, and she glared at me, shouting, "You are just trying to slander us. What kind of daughter-in-law are you?" Susan, who had been subdued, became enraged when faced with me. "I'm not stupid. I have saved our interactions as evidence." I had secretly been collecting evidence of Susan and Mike's insidious harassment, in case I couldn't endure it any longer. My husband showed a surprised expression, then I said, "Tom, I'm sorry I kept quiet. I didn't want to worry you, and I was afraid of ruining your relationship with Susan and Mike." The root of his parents' harassment stemmed from their affection for their beloved son. It was a twisted love, but I wanted to avoid worsening the relationship between Tom, who had been raised with much love from his parents. Susan and Mike, not expecting that I had been considerate of them, turned pale upon hearing this. "Mom, Dad, did you hear? Even after all this, and was still thinking of us." Tom apologized to me, ashamed that he hadn't realized the situation. "And I'm so sorry my parents made you suffer this much." Tom apologized with tears, and Susan, as if regretting how things turned out, exclaimed, "No, it's wrong. It's her fault. She stole our precious son." It was the moment Susan's true nature was revealed. The relatives around us looked on with cold eyes. Even Mike, considering his brother's reputation, tried to stop Susan's outburst. "Who stole me from you? Are you doing all this to and because of me?" My husband was speechless, not expecting such a distorted form of love where Susan's harassment was a retaliation for his affection being directed towards his new family. "I'm grateful for how you raised me. But the most important thing to me now is and our family." He expressed his feelings to Susan and Mike. He then shared how much respect and consideration we had always shown towards Susan and her family. "Mom, Dad, I wanted you to see the irreplaceable love of your grandchildren and Anne's admiration for you." Moved by their son's desperate plea, Susan and Mike seemed to finally realize the gravity of the situation, and Mike collapsed on the spot. "Mom and Dad, you've destroyed your own daughter-in-law's love and my trust with your own hands." Hearing this, Susan, realizing for the first time that she had disappointed her precious son, broke down in tears. Seeing Susan crying and distraught, a part of me felt sorry for her outburst. But more so, I felt a sense of relief in her taking responsibility for this mess. Mike's brother, changing the dire atmosphere, intervened. "All right, this isn't a spectacle. The four of you, please move to a quieter room." With those words, the other relatives awkwardly dispersed. Receiving words of sympathy and encouragement, I began to relax a bit. Supported by my husband's arm, we moved to a quieter room as Mike's brother suggested. Once the four of us were inside, an uncomfortable silence filled the room. My husband still had questions for them, eagerly wanting to confront them. However, Susan and Mike looked so exhausted that he hesitated to speak. Then, Mike's brother entered the room. "Now we can have a calm discussion. Is it true that Anne was subjected to insidious bullying?" With a stern expression, Mike's brother asked directly. After a moment of contemplation, Mike finally nodded in resignation. Triggered by Mike's acknowledgement, my husband burst out. "To think my parents would do this while Anne was protecting our child and unborn baby, it's shameful." He voiced all the accusations as if speaking on my behalf. He revealed that the shrimp allergy, the burn, and the kicking were all acts of spite towards me. "I can't understand how Dad and Mom could hurt Anne to such an extent." Disappointed beyond imagination, my husband's disillusionment deepened. Then, Mike's brother brought an end to the discussion. "Tom, that's enough. As your uncle, I'm deeply sorry for such a shameful sibling. I can't forgive what they've done." He apologized to us, then rushed to Mike and struck him on the cheek. "As your brother, I cannot forgive your actions. Don't show your face at family events anymore." He then instructed Susan and Mike to leave immediately. Susan and Mike seemed to want to say something to me, but the fact that they had kicked me remained unchanged. I ignored their expressions and stayed close to my husband's side. Once Susan and Mike were out of sight, I finally felt a sense of closure and, perhaps relieved, I broke down crying. I don't remember much about what happened next, but my husband stayed by my side until the end. After the revelation of Susan's insidious bullying, my husband forbade any contact or visits from them. This helped me avoid seeing Susan, and gradually, my emotional wounds began to heal. The overseas transfer that was supposed to last 3 years was cut short by my husband, who didn't want to be away any longer. He returned to America after just 1 year. Initially, I was a bit apprehensive, but I supported his return, prioritizing the safe birth of our second child. Now, we are eagerly awaiting the birth of our second child as a family of 3. Susan still sends daily messages of apology, wanting to mend our relationship. When I express my fear of seeing them, my husband continues to prioritize my feelings. The relatives also talk about how haggard Susan looks now. And the general consensus is that it's their own fault. In a situation where my husband and relatives are on my side, there's not much Susan and Mike can do. So, once our second child is born, I plan to show them the baby. However, I have no intention of repairing the relationship with Susan and Mike. I'm resolved to spend an ordinary life with our family of 4, combining our strengths. "I'm going to marry your sister." ATM is no longer needed. I could hear the mocking laughter over the phone. But I didn't let out a surprised sound. I thought if I played into their hands, it would weaken my position. And by now, I had not an iota of love left for my husband, Zach. "Okay, brace yourself," I replied calmly, but inside, anger was boiling over. Zach, who dumped all the childcare, elder care, and housework on me, was enjoying an affair with my sister, Nicole. And Nicole too, after borrowing all that money from me, she slept with my husband and even called me an ATM at the end. It was unforgivable. "You're okay with us divorcing, right?" When Zach pressed me, I simply nodded yes. On the other end of the phone, the two of them cheered. "Enjoy it while you can." There's no way they won't get their comeuppance for belittling me like this. I bit my lip hard. My name is Maggie. I'm 60 years old, living with my husband Zach, who's 5 years my senior. Our son, Alan, is 30 this year, already independent and out of the house. I was working part-time at a grocery store until recently, but due to the recent surge in prices, I was forced into early retirement for cost-cutting. The manager, who was very kind since I worked there for many years, even gave me a severance package despite being part-time. It's a bit sad to retire before reaching the age of retirement, but working at the grocery store definitely helped me grow. So I'm very grateful to the manager who continued to employ me. One might think I'm set for a slow life in retirement, but actually, I'm having some domestic issues. Well, more with Zach than with the household. With our loveless and distant marriage, I'm very anxious about living together for many more years. Why did it come to this? Let me start from the beginning. I met Zach over 40 years ago. Back then, I was a student job hunting, talking to various industry veterans. Most of them were seniors from the newspaper club I was part of. At a club drinking party, many alumni, including Zach, would show up. Maggie, what kind of company do you want to work for? Zach, rumored to be the handsome senior in the club, asked me with a comfortable distance. I honestly told him I wanted to work for a stable company. How about the bank I work at? Banking's probably the most stable, right? Indeed, it seems like a solid job. While my response was cliché, I was happy Zach invited me to his bank. Encouraged by Zach, I applied to his bank and got the job. It wasn't too difficult as the bank hired many students from my university. Once I started working at the bank, I realized many women liked him. Zach, always invited out for meals after work, seemed out of reach for me. But Zach often asked me out, and despite feeling guilty towards his other admirers, I started going out with him more as I was interested. So, we started dating and got married 3 years later, after which I quit the bank. It's regretful to quit just after 4 years, but back then, most women quit upon marriage. Especially since Zach and I were in the same workplace, he seemed to prefer I work part-time elsewhere. I had no regrets about marrying Zach and quitting my job. For a while, we enjoyed our life together until I got pregnant and gave birth to our son, Alan, at 30. Zach, who used to treat me like a princess, suddenly became indifferent after the birth. Zach, can you make a bottle for Alan? A bottle? That's a mom's job. Why do I have to do it? His sudden change in attitude left me more in shock rather than in sadness or anger. I had heard that men sometimes lose interest when their wives give birth. But I thought that was a story for only a small fraction of couples. I never imagined that Zach, who loved me so much, would suddenly cast me aside like throwing something into the open sea after I had our child. From then on, every day was a whirlwind. Zach continued to refuse to help with the baby. Taking care of the baby is a mom's job. Plus, you're a housewife, so it's natural for you to take care of it. I'm busy with work. Zach had his plausible reasons, but they didn't satisfy me. But it's my first time too, and raising the baby alone is hard work. As I countered while watching Zach's reaction, he glared at me. If it's that hard, why don't you go to my dad's? Dad's free and can help you out. To your father? Yeah, that's right. I was utterly shocked by Zach's suggestion. Zach's mom had passed away early, and only his dad, Bob, was left, who recently had trouble with his legs and might need to go to a care facility. How could he think of leaving our child with Bob? Moreover, Zach completely refused to be involved with the baby, essentially just dumping it on his parents. Zach's outlandish idea left me troubled. Since then, I received little help from Zach in raising Alan, and I had to do it alone, repeatedly reading childcare books. Fortunately, Alan was a well-behaved and obedient child, who listened to me and grew up healthy. When Alan turned 5, after sending him off to kindergarten, I noticed a call on my mobile phone. Maggie, it looks like Dad collapsed. I'm thinking of putting him in a facility. Can you handle the paperwork? What? Collapsed? Is he okay? And about the facility? I was very surprised by Zach's call. The news of Bob's collapse was alarming. I hoped he had been taken to the hospital in time. Given Bob's leg condition, it must have been quite a struggle. Bob had always been fond of me, treating me like his own daughter, and I regularly took Alan to visit him, even without Zach asking. The in-laws' house was about a 40-minute drive from our home. Every time we visited, "Thank you for coming all this way," Bob would say with a kind smile. Alan and I both loved Bob and, despite the distance, always wanted to visit him again and again. Hearing that Bob had collapsed, I was filled with anxiety, but Zach only mentioned putting him in a facility in a matter-of-fact tone, which irritated me. "Just handle it, I'm busy with work, okay?" "Wait a minute." Zach cut the call quickly after saying his piece. The idea of putting Bob in a facility was unthinkable to me. Unless it was Bob's own wish, it seemed like Zach was just deciding to put him in a facility on his own. After much thought, I decided to take care of Bob myself as soon as he recovered. When I arrived at the hospital where Bob had been sent, he was in the hospital room and had already regained his consciousness. Bob was over 70 but had struggled to continue the family's farming business despite his leg issues. Both Zach and I had asked Bob to rest, but he insisted on going to the field that day. "Maggie, sorry for troubling you." "No, please, just don't strain yourself anymore." "All right." It seemed Bob had learned his lesson this time and stopped going to the field after being discharged. Bob's field was no longer used for crops, leaving only an empty land. Though it could be revived with care, the land would probably be passed on to Zach, his only son, who I doubted would take up farming. I felt sorry for the neglected field but thought it was for the best if it meant Bob wouldn't strain himself further. After that, I started caring for Bob, visiting the in-laws' house about 3 times a week. I also began working part-time at the grocery store around that time, juggling work, childcare, caregiving, and household chores. For childcare, I switched Alan from kindergarten to daycare with extended hours, managing to make time. I worked 4 mornings a week till after lunch and then went to the in-laws' house. After caring for Bob, I would pick up Alan from daycare, go home, and make dinner. It was very challenging initially due to inexperience. Though it became slightly easier as I got used to it, I didn't realize how tired I was becoming. I had no time to talk to Zach and was overwhelmed just dealing with the tasks at hand. 10 years passed in this manner, and I turned 45, Zach 50. By then, Alan had become a teenager and often rebelled against me. But I saw this as a sign of his growing independence and, while feeling a bit lonely, I was happy about his growth. However, Alan never showed any defiance towards Zach. In fact, he hardly ever spoke to him. Zach had abandoned any childcare responsibilities from Alan's birth, leaving everything to me, so it seemed Alan didn't really think of Zach as his dad. It was around this time that our loveless and distant family relationship reached a critical point. The catalyst was a call from my sister, Nicole. "Hi, Maggie. I just got back from a trip to Hawaii with friends and I've got some souvenirs for you. Can I drop by your place?" Nicole, my elder sister by 3 years, has always been reckless with money and had a fiery temperament, making us quite incompatible. She always wore flashy makeup and was more beautiful than me. I was suspicious of her intention to give me souvenirs but couldn't refuse her kind gesture and agreed. When Nicole came over the weekend, she handed me the souvenirs, which I realized were not from Hawaii and were clearly common sweets available locally. I chose to stay silent, thinking that pointing this out would only upset her. "Hey, Maggie. I'm short on cash this month. Can you lend me some money?" Suddenly visiting with a fake souvenir and now this, I wondered what she was up to. "Lend you money? Why?" I suspected it was just Nicole's usual spending habits leaving her broke. "Well, I've been feeling unwell lately. The doctor said I might need to be hospitalized. But I don't have insurance and can't afford the hospital and treatment costs." Nicole, sounding feeble, left me speechless. What kind of illness required hospitalization? I silently stared at Nicole, who looked at me pleadingly. Okay. Just pay me back after your treatment. Thanks. Sisters are the best. Nicole's face lit up as she shook my hand. Despite our differences, she was my sister and I wanted her to get well soon if she was ill. By the way, when is Zach getting back? Once Nicole knew I'd lent her the money, she casually asked this. Zach just went to the grocery store. Oh, I see. I'll just say hi then and leave. Right then, the front door opened and Zach returned. Hey, Zach. Oh, Nicole. You're here. Yes, just had something to discuss with Maggie. But I'm done now and will be leaving. As Nicole stood up and passed by Zach, she seemed to whisper something in his ear. After Nicole left. What did Nicole say to you earlier? I asked, but nothing important. Zach evaded the question. I remained curious but soon forgot about it. The discovery of Zach and Nicole's affair happened a month later. I planned to visit Bob that day, but work got extended, so I postponed my visit to the in-laws' house to the next day and went home as usual. Alan was at the library, so only Zach should have been home. Why are there women's shoes here? As I took off my shoes at the entrance, I noticed a familiar pair of heels. They were the high heels Nicole wore over the weekend. Entering the house, the living room was empty, which relieved me momentarily. But then, from the bedroom, I heard faint, indiscreet voices of Zach and Nicole. What are they doing? I considered confronting them right then, but hesitated at the last moment. What if Zach demands a divorce after being exposed? Alan wouldn't want to live with Zach. But I wasn't confident I could afford Alan's education fees alone. If we were to divorce, I wanted to wait until Alan had graduated from college. Frustrated, I decided to leave the house, pretending I saw nothing. Instead, I gathered evidence of the affair, taking photos of their traces and secretly saving the exchanges between Zach and Nicole from his mobile phone. It appeared they had been having an affair for about 6 months. Despite the anger boiling inside me, I reminded myself it was for Alan and endured, not exposing the affair. Another 15 years have passed since then, and Alan is now part of the working world. After graduating from college and leaving his first job early, Alan set up his own business and is now working hard as its president. And as the story goes, I had retired from the grocery store, but I was working a little at Alan's company. I had been giving Nicole money for her treatment bit by bit, but when her requests became too persistent, I grew reluctant to lend more and started ignoring her calls. In fact, the signs of Nicole and Zach's affair had disappeared about a year after it came to light. Zach probably got bored of Nicole. He changed his mind and chose to stay married to me. Knowing this, I couldn't bring myself to pursue the matter of the affair anymore and decided to pretend it never happened. But I realized my naivety when I heard about Bob's death. I got the news about Bob from Zach during the day. Bob had lived a long life until 95, but I was deeply shocked by the loss of Bob, who I had cared for so long. Bob, unlike Zach, was kind and considerate, so his passing felt like losing my own parent. Yet even then, Zach said, "Dad seems to have accumulated a lot of wealth, so that's exciting." Laughing. I was so angry that I thought of giving Zach a piece of my mind, but then I heard a woman's laughter from nearby. Oops, did she realize we're together? I was chilled to the bone at the sound of Nicole's voice. Had Nicole and Zach's relationship not ended after all? For 15 years, they had continued their affair without my knowledge. Realizing this, they seemed like an incomprehensible entity to me. "I'm going to marry your sister. ATM is no longer needed." I could hear the mocking laughter over the phone. But I didn't let out a sound of surprise. I thought if I played into their hands, it would weaken my position, and by now, I had not an iota of love left for Zach. "Okay, brace yourself," I replied calmly, but inside, anger was boiling over. Zach, who dumped all the childcare, elder care, and housework on me, was enjoying an affair with Nicole. And Nicole too. After borrowing all that money from me, she slept with my husband and even called me an ATM at the end. It was unforgivable. You're okay with us divorcing, right? When Zach pressed me, I simply nodded yes. On the other end of the phone, the two of them cheered. Enjoy it while you can. There's no way they won't get their comeuppance for belittling me like this. I bit my lip hard. After Bob's funeral, I filed for divorce as promised. When I informed Zach, he seemed so delighted that it felt like he was doing it on purpose. Now that we're divorced, you should leave this house as soon as possible. Me leave? I asked, surprised, and Zach nodded as if it were obvious. I'm going to live with Nicole, and you'll be living alone. This house is too big for one person. Anger turned to disbelief, and I said, okay. Too weary to argue, and agreed to Zach's demands. Though upset, I had already considered my living situation before the divorce. Leaving our home, I headed to Alan's, who was living independently. I had contacted Alan beforehand, and he welcomed his mom, who had just left Zach, with open arms. He's truly a kind son. I resolved to work even harder at Alan's company. A few days later, a man claiming to be a lawyer contacted me. When I went to the specified location, Zach, Nicole, and the lawyer were seated. I am in possession of a will left by Zach's dad, the lawyer said, and took out the will signed by Bob from his bag. I was surprised as I didn't know Bob had left a will. As Zach's only child, he was the legal heir to Bob's assets. Being no longer Zach's wife, I had no claim to any inheritance. Why was I called then? As I wondered, the lawyer read the will. Its contents were astounding. Bob had left half of his assets to me. That meant the field Bob owned was now part of my estate. While Zach would inherit the other half due to his legal share, he had surely not expected me to inherit anything. Why does Maggie get half of the inheritance? I'm his only son. I should receive it all. Dad was very grateful to Maggie for her selfless care, even though they were not related by blood. He meant it as a thank you. Bob. I was deeply moved by Bob's thoughtfulness. What the heck is this? I thought we could finally relax with the inheritance. Nicole twisted her face in frustration. The lawyer then mentioned that Bob's will had also left all of his debts to Zach, but it seemed Zach and Nicole were too upset to hear that part. I was overwhelmed with gratitude towards Bob, and before I knew it, tears were streaming down my face. Thank you, Bob. Seeing me in tears, the two of them seemed to grow even angrier, but the lawyer concluded. That is the content of the will. With that, Zach and Nicole seemed to snap back to reality. I'm not happy about losing half, but hey, we still have half of the inheritance left. Gotta thank the law for that. Zach said as he patted Nicole's shoulder, who nodded in agreement, right. Well, we'll be leaving now. We won't have anything to do with you anymore, so take care. They laughed loudly as they left. I returned to Alan's house, savoring Bob's last act of kindness. After receiving the inheritance from Bob, I continued working at Alan's place without incident, and before I knew it, 2 months had passed. That's when Zach called me, on a Sunday. Alan and I were both off work, relaxing at home, but my mobile phone started ringing insistently. Zach! The air froze between me and Alan as we realized it was Zach calling. Why is Dad calling? He abandoned you, and now what does he want? You don't have to answer. Alan said so, but the phone kept ringing persistently. Irritated, I decided to answer to silence Zach. What is it, calling me repeatedly? You said we wouldn't have anything to do with each other ever again. I answered with a tone of annoyance, but Zach seemed not to hear me and started talking frantically. Hey, what's going on? Why are you working at Alan's company? And why is Alan's company being featured on TV? And what's with showing your fancy house? Zach's near hysterical voice echoed through the phone, causing Alan to frown. You saw the TV. I realized why Zach was calling all of a sudden. Recently, a TV station had interviewed Zach's gym, and it was broadcast yesterday. Alan's gym, which combines a gym and cafe, had caught the TV station's interest due to its novelty. Since opening, the gym had rapidly increased its membership, and Alan appeared on TV as a successful young entrepreneur, even showcasing our home as Zach mentioned. The house we live in now, Alan's home, is quite luxurious, far surpassing the neighboring houses in size. So Zach saw Alan's house and was shocked enough to call. "What do you mean you guys are living in such a big house? Over here, Nicole used up all of Dad's inheritance, and I even got left with his debts. Damn it, I didn't hear about that from the lawyer back then." Zach yelled angrily over the phone. But back then, the lawyer did mention that Bob had left all his debts to Zach. It wasn't my fault that Zach had not listened, and it was none of my business. "It's none of my business, Zach. The lawyer clearly mentioned it, and it's your responsibility for not paying attention. Besides, you knew about Nicole's spending habits even before marrying her, right? I gave her money for treatment and haven't been repaid yet. This just proves to me that you and Nicole are the worst kind of people, quick to betray someone you should trust." In response to my correct argument, Zach remained silent, unable to say anything. "Besides, isn't it all your fault for cheating on me in the first place? I just don't understand why I have to be blamed." I let out my pent-up frustrations, feeling somewhat relieved. Realizing he couldn't blame me, Zach suddenly changed his tone to a pleading one. "Please, Maggie. I'm begging you, lend me some money. I was supposed to get a retirement fund this year, but I got fired, and all I'm left with are Dad's debts. Nicole left after we argued about money. How am I supposed to live now? You're my only hope. I admit I was wrong about everything. I apologize. Just give me a little bit of Dad's inheritance. You're living a good life with Alan, right? Think of it as helping someone out, okay?" His nerve to beg his ex-wife for money after cheating and leaving her was beyond comprehension. Alan, who had been listening to the conversation, looked at me, seemingly wanting to say something. I handed my mobile phone to Alan. Alan turned on the speaker and firmly said to Zach, "Dad, you betrayed Mom and married Nicole, right? And I heard you never took care of me since I was born. I don't have any memories of playing with you after I became aware. It was always just Mom and me. On Parents' Day and Sports Day, it was always just Mom who came. That's why I'm helping Mom with my company and living with her. Why should I, who you never did anything for, lend you money? My only parent is Mom. I won't give you a single dollar." Alan's strong, businesslike tone choked me up. I could sense Zach gasping on the other end of the phone. "Alan, how could you say that to your dad? Fine, I won't rely on you guys ever again. Don't insult me." With that, Zach hung up. We looked at the silent mobile phone and then burst out laughing together. "Zach begged us for money, and now he says he won't have anything to do with us. What an idiot." "Yeah. Dad has always been like that, getting angry without thinking ahead." As we discussed Zach's foolishness, the phone rang again. It was Zach. He probably wanted to ask for money, despite saying he wouldn't contact us again. Fed up, I blocked Zach's contact. "That's it. Now that fool can't bother us anymore." "Yeah. Thanks, Mom." His gratitude for being raised seemed implicit. "I should be the one thanking you. You've given me such a great life. No matter how old you get, you're still my precious son." We reaffirmed our bond as mother and son, grateful for each other's presence in our spacious home. A few days later, my sister Nicole called me. Her request was almost identical to what Zach had said. I couldn't fathom lending more money to Nicole, who hadn't even repaid what she owed me. In fact, I hadn't yet demanded compensation for her affair with Zach, so I successfully sued both of them for damages through a lawyer. They ended up getting divorced after being married. Their marriage only lasted for 2 months. Zach was even worse off than Nicole. The negative inheritance he received from Dad was too substantial. Bob had borrowed a lot of money for farming, managing it all by himself. I hadn't known about it. While caring for Bob, he often complained about Zach. Bob was able to forgive Zach for not taking over the farming business, but the fact that he didn't take care of Alan and not visit his own father was unforgivable. He was also furious with the way Zach treated me, and I always tried to soothe him, saying it was okay. If kind Bob was that angry, Zach must have been quite a negligent son. All of Zach's expected retirement funds were gone due to his dismissal for misconduct. Rumor has it he even tried to embezzle money from his bank to pay off his debts. Had he just worked quietly until the end, he would have received his retirement money. His greed was his downfall. Now, while receiving a pension, he seems to be working 3 part-time jobs to pay off his debts. Starting a new job at 65 and being taught by younger people as a newcomer must be shattering his pride. Although he has worked as a bank employee for many years, his part-time job as a new employee involves a lot of odd jobs. A hard adjustment for someone who never did housework, childcare, or elder care. He'll likely give up soon enough. For Zach, who neglected his son and cheated with Nicole for years, it's a fitting punishment. I hope he manages until the end. As for me, I'm still working energetically at Alan's workplace. The staff, who are around my child's age, treat me very kindly. Our workplace is always full of smiles, attracting many customers. Alan recently got engaged to a girl a year younger than him and introduced her to me. She's a wonderful, sensible young lady. Well respected at work. I was planning to move out when they married, but she insisted we live together. I'm grateful for her kindness and looking forward to our future together. You're the low-educated, incompetent employee which Mom told me about, huh? Suddenly, I was tasked with conducting an interview. My interviewee was Catherine, a daughter of a director who was scheming nepotism. However, she started laughing loudly, crossed her legs, and began to look down on me, bringing the interview to the verge of collapse. I couldn't believe the company was considering hiring someone like her. Later, when the director heard my report, he began to tremble. I'm 32 years old. After graduating from college and switching jobs once, I'm now working steadily at my current company. I usually work in the HR, and my boss, Jacqueline, the director, is someone I deeply respect. Because she is always cheerful and highly trusted by everyone around her. Though I respected the director, I often felt something was off. But I couldn't figure out what it was and continued to work with her for 5 years. Finally, I grasped what that feeling was about. It became clear when the director suddenly had to step away, and I was asked to interview her daughter as a stand-in. This led to an unbelievable fate for both the director and her daughter. Sorry to ask, but could you interview my daughter? Don't feel pressured just because she's my daughter, just treat her like usual. Understood. Leave it to me. She must be excellent, being your daughter. Thanks. I have to go now. Good luck. One day, I was suddenly asked to conduct an interview. The director had an unfortunate schedule change with a client and had to rush to a meeting room with the chief. But today was also the day her daughter was coming for an interview, so she asked me and my colleague Nancy to take over. Since we had no particular plans, so we happily agreed and saw the director off. Since the interview wasn't until the afternoon, we continued our usual work until then. I thought it would just be a formal interview, considering she was the director's daughter. After joining the company, the director's daughter was going to work as my colleague. Apparently, someone in our department was transferring next year, and the director recommended her daughter to fill the vacancy. While I was looking forward to it and working, someone tapped my shoulder. I turned around to find Isabel, the chairman's daughter, standing there. Isabel is quiet but a vital member who always works earnestly. I only found out Isabel was the chairman's daughter recently, during the first drinking party in a long time where the director shared the story. Isabel wasn't at that gathering, but later, when I checked in with her, it turned out to be true. It's a fact known to those in positions above the director, but not to the general employees. Isabel kept it hidden because she didn't want everyone to know. After hearing this, I apologized. Isabel smiled, forgave me, and after some small talk, we became a bit closer. About this document. Do you have questions? I'll help if I can. Thank you. Isabel smiled gently. The reason why I could see such a smile because we had talked and gotten a little closer. Until then, Isabel had been someone who worked methodically, seldom interacting with other employees. Since she didn't exhibit any notable problem behaviors, no one in the department really said much. Now that I had talked to her and become a bit friendlier, I started approaching her, but until then, since there was no interaction outside of work, I hadn't paid her much attention. I'm sure most others felt the same way. Besides, Isabel herself probably liked being alone. At that time, that was all I understood about her. But later, I came to know that Isabel was dealing with some troubles. When I heard about them, I was shocked and couldn't believe it. Hi, I'm Catherine. Thank you for having me today. The afternoon passed, and it was time for the interview. As the interviewer, I was waiting in the interview room with my colleague for the director's daughter. She arrived on time, as scheduled. Her educational background was impeccable, with active participation in volunteer work and cultural exchanges. She had also studied abroad, and her resume mentioned proficiency in German. Please, take a seat. I said that, guiding Catherine to the chair in front of me. Catherine had frozen for a bit after entering, then looked uneasy, as if she wanted to ask something. She seemed confused not to see her mother among the interviewers. I explained that the director had urgent business and that my colleague and I had taken over the interview. The director isn't here, but please relax and answer the questions. They aren't too difficult. When I said this, Catherine furrowed her brows and looked at me. She sat down, her face tensing with nervousness. I kept my tone calm and asked the questions formally. However, the interview didn't go as I expected. Catherine gave careless responses and didn't answer even simple questions. I didn't show it, but I was very surprised inside. I had checked her resume and imagined her to be a competent person, so the contrast was startling. Are you nervous? Concerned, I asked this, to which Catherine looked at me with her eyes narrowed. I hope you don't mind me asking, but are you really standing in for my mother? Wouldn't the person next to you be more competent? Excuse me? I was taken aback by her unexpected words. As I wondered about her intention, Catherine slouched back, sneering. Like, is this interview even necessary? My mom is a director, you know? I wasn't told I'd have to spend so much time on this. I have plans later. Her attitude left me speechless. What was she talking about? Seeing me silent, Catherine burst out laughing. Didn't you know? It's as if I'm already hired. Unlike you, I'm competent. Please watch your language. We are in the middle of an interview. I don't care what you think, but please answer our questions properly. When I retorted irritably, Catherine closed her mouth in displeasure. I had high hopes knowing she was the director's daughter, but now I couldn't deny feeling disappointed. However, since she said she is joining the company, I tried to persuade her. But it seemed nothing got through to Catherine. She absent-mindedly fiddled with her nails, not even trying to make eye contact. It's kind of funny how desperate you are. I do want a job, but I'm not exactly enthusiastic. I just need enough money to live. Even so, working comes with responsibilities, right? You understand that, having come for the interview? I heard this company has a good work-life balance. It is impossible for someone as incompetent as you to convince me. Do you get it? Catherine's flippant attitude during the interview left me with an indescribable feeling. Indeed, many people in the company have a similar stance as her. But even they think proactively and act responsibly. I just wanted her to understand that, but Catherine dismissed it as something only enthusiastic employees do, arguing that it makes no difference in terms of evaluation, so it's pointless. I didn't want to work with someone like her. My colleague, perhaps feeling the same, shook their head in displeasure. If you understand, can you hurry up and end the interview? I know about you, you know. Catherine said this with a sly smile. I didn't understand what she meant, but for some reason, Catherine looked triumphant. Mom said we don't need people like you in this company. Catherine said this, crossing her arms and puffing out her chest. Hearing her words, I couldn't help but tense up and look at her. Catherine seemed self-assured, sneering at me with a side glance. Then she began to act arrogantly. I could interview you if you want. I don't understand what you're saying. Frustrated, I responded, and Catherine provoked me, saying if I'm not incompetent, I should be able to answer her questions. Are you refusing because you can't answer? Even when I disagreed, Catherine wouldn't listen. Since she persistently said I should be able to answer otherwise, I finally asked what she wanted to know. With a malicious smile, Catherine started prying into my educational background. What I did as a student, and whether I've made any achievements in the current company. When I answered honestly, she laughed it off and became even more arrogant. Eventually, she crossed her legs and laughed loudly, claiming that I would soon be her subordinate. When I asked what she meant, Catherine turned to me as if she were glad that I asked that question. I am planning to take over Mom's position. I'm the director's daughter, and she said she'd bring me in. So it's like I'm being hired for her succession, right? Huh? Even if you join the company, you can't just become a director so easily. You have to learn the job first, right? That'll be easy. Mom acknowledges my ability. I'm sure I can learn the job in a year, right? Then, I will become a manager in the second year, and a director in the third year. I'm talented, so maybe I won't even need a full year to learn the job. I was increasingly astounded. It was a natural reaction, considering she was missing the steps to become a manager. My colleague, too, looked dismayed and was no longer interested in conducting a proper interview. We should better be wrapping up this troublesome interview quickly. Then, we should report this to the director, suggesting she reconsider hiring her daughter. I understood your career plan. However, I won't be your subordinate. Please revisit our company's website and check the career plans of your seniors. You'll realize your plan is unrealistic. I said that, trying to end the interview. I never imagined I'd have to lecture someone like this during an interview. Suppressing a sigh, I sent Catherine a silent look, signaling her to leave. But Catherine, seemingly unsatisfied. Why? She asked. There's nothing more to answer. After I said that, Catherine stood up abruptly. The chair she had been sitting in toppled backward with a clatter. Ignoring that, Catherine approached me and leaned on the desk in front of me. Why? Isn't it natural I'll be your boss? I ask you, why would I become your subordinate? Because you're the low-educated, incompetent employee Mom told me about. I was stunned by her words. Catherine, looking down on me, talked about what her mother had said. I was astounded to hear the content of her story. After venting everything, Catherine left the interview room, seemingly satisfied. Left behind, I exchanged glances with my subordinate next to me, mentioning the need to verify the truth of her story with the director. We need to discuss this in our interview report this evening. In the evening, I approached the director, who had returned to our department looking a bit tired from a long meeting. The director, though tired, urged me to continue. I revealed the outrageous behavior of the director's daughter at the interview. The director, wide-eyed and deeply shocked, listened to my words. My child behaved like that. I know it's hard to believe, but it's the truth. Also, there was something else she mentioned that concerned me. What is it? With a tense face, I told the director everything Catherine had said. The director became even more confused, turning red with anger, and raised her voice. Hearing her, people around the floor started staring at us. Yet, I calmly affirmed the facts. Jacqueline, did you tell your daughter I'm a low-educated, incompetent employee? If that's true, I'll have to respond accordingly. Are you threatening me? No, not at all. I just have personal concerns and wanted to verify the facts. Hearing this, the director looked confused. I don't know what my daughter said, but do as you like. The director, seemingly unable to contain her anger, made a dismissing gesture with her hand. My perception of the director changed significantly that day. Later, the director called me in. I also had things to discuss after completing my fact-checking, so I responded to her call. The meeting was in a conference room. I opened the door and greeted as I entered. Inside, the director was waiting for me, pale and trembling. You've done something unnecessary, haven't you? What do you mean? Don't play dumb. The director approached me as I entered the room, glaring at me fiercely. Despite her menacing look, I started recording on my mobile phone in my pocket. The director was still pale, showing signs of distress. Yesterday, you talked about fact-checking, but what exactly did you verify and with whom? Because of you, I was called in by the vice presidents this morning, and... So, were you told to consider a department transfer and resign from your position? So, it was you. Confess what you did. Confronted with her accusations, I honestly explained my actions from the previous day. First, I had a direct conversation with the director. I thought I was the incompetent, low-educated employee her daughter mentioned at the interview, but as we talked, unfamiliar facts emerged. The employee who the director's daughter often heard about was someone the director always burdened with work, leading to almost daily overtime. I was shocked as I had no memory of such treatment, initially thinking the director's daughter was lying. However, seeing my colleague's stiffened face after hearing the story confirmed its veracity. Actually, there's one person in the department who has a lot of overtime. Really? Who is it? Yes. I manage the overtime records on a computer, and I always thought something was odd. I was unaware my colleague was doing this and was just impressed. My own overtime was within the regulations, so I wasn't the person mentioned in the story. But the revelation of who was doing the excessive overtime was a shock. It's Isabel. I was stunned. There was no indication of this, but I decided to confirm it with Isabel herself, accompanied by my colleague. Hearing our questions, Isabel initially tried to evade but eventually broke down, crying about the work dumped on her by the director and the difficulties she faced when left out of communication. I realized I didn't notice, or perhaps didn't want to notice. I should have been aware sooner. Isabel had been struggling alone all this time. Her lack of interaction was to avoid conflict with the director, who often caused trouble when she spoke with others. Angered by these underhanded tactics, I confronted the director directly, but she denied everything, which prompted me to take the next step. That night, I consulted with the CEO and chairman. Although I was only a manager, I was actually favored by the CEO and chairman, having been headhunted to this company. I was quite close to them, often invited to dinner meetings. I had a dinner appointment with the CEO and chairman, where I objectively discussed Isabel and the director's actions, expressing my concerns. The CEOs listened calmly and promised to investigate. But I couldn't wait. When I expressed concern to the chairman about his granddaughter, he questioned how I knew about Isabel, but admitted their relationship after I explained our recent closeness. The CEO, though not related to Isabel by blood, was the one who had invited her to the company. Taking responsibility, the CEO deeply reflected and offered some advice, which brought me here today. Jacqueline, did you really do such things to Isabel? When I asked this, the director, initially flustered, finally admitted her actions as I persisted. At first, I didn't. But then, thinking she might be the next CEO as a chairman's granddaughter, I panicked. Were you aiming for the CEO position, Jacqueline? Yes, is that so wrong? I've devoted myself to this company for that. I thought I finally became a director and next would be the CEO. I can't let her get in my way. Hearing the director's ambition, I was taken aback. But it seemed she had greatly erred in her methods. Furthermore, if she had truly achieved significant accomplishments, the CEO would have recognized her. The director seemed defiant. As she started to slander Isabel, I interrupted her unbearable words to continue. I understand your point, Jacqueline. You understand. So, this time. But you're wrong. You pushed Isabel too hard. Please take responsibility for that. As I firmly said this, the conference room door opened. There stood Isabel, flanked by the CEO and chairman. The director gasped at the sight. Are you trying to deceive me? No, I brought Isabel here because I wanted you to apologize to her. As I said this, the director clenched her back teeth in frustration and glared at me. If that's your intention, then I won't hold back anymore. Be prepared. The director, glaring, positioned herself in front of Isabel. She then turned her fierce gaze on Isabel and appealed to the CEO and chairman standing beside her. Please listen to me. You are being deceived. These two conspired to overthrow me. The director, with clenched fists and a stern face, made her accusation strongly. The CEO and chairman, displeased by the director's words, watched as she fabricated a story about how we pinned our mistakes on her. I didn't do such a thing. This all started when I investigated what your daughter said during the interview. You admitted it, didn't you? Please take the responsibility. No. I only admitted because I was forced into a corner. Where's the proof my daughter said those things? We have the interview recorded. I'll ask Nancy to bring it right now. Please wait a moment. I immediately called my colleague, who quickly brought the interview recording to the conference room. We projected the interview footage, the report, and Isabel's overtime data with the room's projector, showing them to the CEO and chairman. Still, the director didn't give up. She accused me of threatening her daughter during the interview to coerce damaging testimony, and claimed I manipulated Isabel's overtime data using my colleague. I was deceived. This woman has been carrying out a meticulous plan. I realized it too late. The director even began to fake cry poorly. Then she called Catherine, put it on speaker, and asked if I had threatened her during the interview. Catherine, maintaining her usual tone but becoming angry upon hearing my name, said the interview was terrible. My daughter says this. Do you still believe her? Are you saying I bullied and cornered Isabel? Just because she's your cute granddaughter, you're playing favorites? That's absurd. The chairman and others looked displeased at her words. I decided to present my final piece of evidence. I have an audio recording of you admitting what you did to Isabel. It's from our conversation before Isabel and the others arrived. Please give up and admit it. And apologize to Isabel. I played the audio of our earlier conversation from my mobile phone. Hearing her own words and realizing I had recorded the conversation, the director clenched her back teeth in frustration. This is a clear violation of compliance. The director had no further rebuttals. The CEO and chairman then informed her that a meeting would be held to discuss her future sanctions and advised her to prepare any counterarguments by then. Hearing this, the director slumped in her seat with a look of despair on her face. Subsequently, the director was stripped of her position. Her salary was reduced, and she was transferred to a small, regional department. It's unlikely she will ever return to a director's role, regardless of her future achievements. Naturally, Catherine's job offer was also revoked. Catherine, outraged that she was treated this way because of her mother, stormed into the company but was quickly restrained by security and taken away. According to a rumor, the director, who was already divorced, recently disowned her daughter and is now living alone in an apartment near her new department. I received thanks from Isabel. Furthermore, I was promoted from manager to director and am now working as the director of human resources. While I was genuinely happy about the promotion, I also regretted not realizing the situation sooner. Still, Isabel is strong. Since the director's departure, she seems to have regained her spirits over time. Seeing this brought me relief. I enjoy my work at this company. I hope that one day Isabel will come to feel the same way. Hey, mister. I'm the daughter of this company's owner, all right? My dad's the boss. Don't lump me with these lowly, poor employees. Surprised by both her vulgarity and her true identity, my dad paused with a shocked expression, then cleared his throat softly. Meanwhile, Carol wore a smug look, as if she had just made a grand statement. Remembering that Dad originally came to our company for business, I realized we couldn't afford to cause any more trouble. So I tried to apologize to Carol. Just then, Dad spoke in a low voice. So, the lower ranks are the poor employees, huh? Maybe it's time to revise the salary structure. He muttered this almost to himself. What? Are you mocking me? Fine. Mister, what's your name? Which subcontractor do you work for? I'll tell Dad about you. It might just be your fault if the company goes under. Carol retorted. Dad, looking slightly puzzled, thought for a moment before breaking into a smile. Then, let's go say hello to the boss. Lenore and the others, come along. Everyone except Dad looked shocked, but he walked ahead. Not wanting to be left behind, we hurried after him. My name is Lenore. I'm a hardworking 28-year-old. The company I work for is quite large, and I work tirelessly every day. My dad, concerned about me, contacts me once a week, but I always reply with, "Don't worry," trying to reassure him, almost forcibly. His concern is probably because he wants to recruit me to his company. 7 years ago, when I was still a college student, I was busy with job hunting every day to secure a job offer. Dad, who runs his own company, once invited me to join his company, saying, "Why bother with job hunting? You can just come work for my company." It's not that I didn't want to go to his company, but I didn't want to rely on such connections. I wanted to succeed on my own merit. And I wanted to work alongside him, as an equal, once I was fully competent at my job. I explained this and persuaded him. Reluctantly, he agreed, and I joined my current company. It's been 6 years since I started working here. Now, I have more responsibilities, and I even have subordinates. And it's our busy season. It's not uncommon for our department heads to be absent from the office for an entire day during this time, and sometimes I can't even sit at my desk for more than 30 minutes. We're that busy. I don't have the luxury of constantly worrying about Dad's feelings. Today, I've been bustling around the office since morning. Even amidst the rush, a shrill voice caught my ear as I passed by a meeting room, prompting me to stop. The door was slightly ajar, and peering inside, I saw a woman with a tray bowing her head before another woman who sat arrogantly, berating her. How many times do I have to tell you? I don't like coffee, I want Coke. It seemed the employee had brought the wrong beverage. The angry woman looked younger than me, but whose guest was she? A frequent complainer, perhaps? It's disgraceful to fuss over complimentary beverages. I wondered what her parents would think. Just as I was about to open the door and intervene. Ah, there she goes again. I heard a voice behind me. Turning around, I saw my colleague Sissy peeking into the room. You scared me. Don't just start talking out of nowhere. I chided her in a whisper, careful not to be overheard. Sorry. But it's unexpected to see you peeking, Lenore, she said with a mischievous grin. Sissy is only a year younger than me, even though she's my subordinate. We get along well and often go out for drinks. Professionally, she's my subordinate, but in our private lives, we're like friends. I wasn't peeking. By the way, Sissy, do you know who that woman is? I asked. Oh, she's quite notorious around here, Sissy replied with a slight smirk. That's Carol, the boss's only daughter. His daughter? But why is she here? I inquired, puzzled. She occasionally comes to play around like this, throwing her weight around with the staff. No one dares to contradict her because she's the boss's daughter. As Sissy explained, Carol continued to berate the employee. Go buy me a Coke! What's your name? I'll tell Dad, she shouted. I want to help that employee, my colleague, but I hesitated. Let's get back to work for now, Lenore. Sissy suggested. Poor thing, we don't keep Coke for guests. Sissy gently closed the meeting room door, holding the handle that I was gripping. She enjoys bossing the staff around like this. She never actually reports anyone. Last week, it was ginger ale. You have work to do, Lenore. She's not worth your time. Her words reminded me of the tasks I had to complete. Sissy, are you free now? Want to come to the warehouse with me? Sure. I was actually looking for you. I have some business there too. We left the meeting room, the shouts still echoing, with heavy hearts. Why does Carol come here to play? She should be having fun with friends. She looks college-aged. I pondered aloud while checking inventory in the warehouse. Apparently, she's joining the company next year. She's been visiting frequently for that. You'd think she'd rather be with friends, but she doesn't seem to have many. Sissy commented. True. I mused, feeling uneasy about Carol. Shouldn't she value the employees who support her family's business? Especially since they'll be her coworkers and supervisors next year? It's not right to treat them as mere playthings. Does she not realize she's embarrassing her parents? As I pondered these things, the pressure of my pen on the inventory notes inadvertently grew stronger. Noticing this, Sissy glanced at my notes. I get why you're angry, Lenore. She's exactly the type of person you dislike the most, she said with a wry smile. That's true, but what really irks me is the boss and the executives who say nothing. They should reprimand her for such behavior. Apparently, she's an overindulged child, born late in her father's life. Sissy explained with a gentle smile, easing me back into work mode. Thanks to her, I managed to finish the warehouse work surprisingly quickly. Exhausted from the day, I was heading home when my mobile phone rang. It was a message from Dad. Lenore, I'm coming to your company tomorrow for a business deal. If you're free, I'd like to see you. I was surprised. Dad was visiting my office? The company I work for is in the same industry as his company, and I knew they were connected, but it was the first time he had shown his face at my company in the 6 years I've been working there. I hoped to see him, but it really depended on timing, so I just replied, If I'm free, I'll come and see you. Let me know. And then closed the message. The next day, my office was busy, but things started to calm down by lunchtime. While eating, I received a message from Dad. I'll be at your company soon. I checked the time and decided to wait for him outside. As I got up, Sissy, sitting next to me, asked, Where are you rushing off to, Lenore? It's still lunch break. Oh, my dad is visiting the office today. I thought I'd go say hi since it's been a while. What? Can I come too, just to greet him? She asked excitedly. Sure, let's go together, I agreed. Sissy followed me, checking her reflection in the window and fixing her hair. I was pleased to have such an eager subordinate. While Sissy and I waited for my dad at the entrance. Is that him? She suddenly pointed to a taxi. I shook my head. Steve would have driven his own car rather than take a taxi. As we looked in the opposite direction, a shrill voice called out, Nice of you to meet me here. I pretended not to hear, but Sissy made a disgusted face as if to say this is the worst. Hey, you over there, where are you looking? I'm right here. I turned around, frustrated. And there was Carol. She was dressed inappropriately for the office, in a flouncy miniskirt and casual t-shirt, clacking her heels as she walked towards us. Excuse me, but you're mistaken. We're waiting for someone else here, I said, looking away again. In an ear-piercing tone, Carol shouted, What's with that attitude? Aren't you an employee here? Apologize right now. Sissy looked at me with a panicked expression. Yes, I'm an employee. But why should I apologize? I responded calmly. What? Carol seemed even more incensed by this. You, a lowly employee, think you can talk to me like that? Really, old lady? Well, a company needs its lowly employees, doesn't it? And for your information, I'm only 28, not an old lady. Carol burst into laughter at my reply. 28? You look much older. Is it hard being poor? I pity you, she said, pointing at me mockingly. I was furious, but I couldn't do much since she was the boss's daughter. I had to stand there, seething in silence, as she laughed. Then, "Hey, Lenore! Long time no see!" I heard a voice from afar. Approaching us was Dad, a slightly overweight, ordinary-looking man in a suit, waving his hand. "Who's that weird guy?" "Hilarious," Carol said, looking at him and laughing. That was the last straw for me. "Excuse me, that's rude." I raised my voice. "What? Who are you yelling at?" Carol yelled back. "What's going on? Are you all friends?" Unaware of the situation, Dad smiled at me kindly. "What? As if I would be friends with these people." Carol snapped at him, switching her target from me to him. Dad's expression changed immediately. "How rude to say these people when you are colleagues who work together." He was right, but Carol wasn't convinced. "Listen, old man. I'm the daughter of this company's owner. My dad is the boss. Don't lump me with these lowly, poor employees." Dad looked shocked by Carol's rudeness and her identity, then cleared his throat softly. Meanwhile, Carol looked smug, as if she had just triumphed. Remembering that Dad originally came to our company for business, I realized we couldn't afford to cause any more trouble. So I tried to apologize to Carol. But at that moment, Dad spoke in a low voice. "So, the lower ranks are the poor employees, huh? Maybe it's time to revise the salary structure." He muttered this to himself. "What? Are you mocking me? Fine. Mister, what's your name? Which subcontracting company are you from? I'll tell my dad about you. You might just ruin the company." Carol spat out. Dad, looking puzzled, thought for a moment before smiling. "Well then, let's go greet the boss. Lenore and the others, come along." The only one unfazed by the situation was Dad, who had already started walking ahead. Not wanting to be left behind, we quickly followed him. We reached the boss's office, and Dad entered first. Sissy and I followed, tense. Carol, pushing past us, rushed to her father. "Dad! This man, he—" She began to tattle immediately. Before Carol could finish, her father spoke loudly. "This man? Who are you talking to?" "I'm sorry, Steve. My daughter lacks manners." He shot Carol a sharp look to silence her, then turned to us with a smile. "Ah, it's your daughter with you today?" "Did you know about me?" I asked, surprised. Dad sat down on a sofa. "Wait, Dad," Carol protested. Dad gave me a kind look, then turned his sharp gaze to the boss. "Earlier, your daughter called my daughter and her colleague lowly, poor employees. What's this about?" The boss's face tightened. "Well, they deserved it. They were rude to me, just low-end employees." Carol continued in her shrill voice. "What?" The boss turned pale and shouted angrily at Carol. "What are you saying? This lady is the daughter of a valued client, and this man is her father and the current boss." "Eh?" Carol's face turned pale, realizing the gravity of her actions. To think such a large company still treats its employees as poor. You've become quite the boss, haven't you? If your employees are poor, shouldn't the company be ashamed? The boss was sweating profusely. "I can't leave my daughter in such a place. She'll resign today." When the boss heard that, he immediately apologized to my dad and said, "I'm terribly sorry. I've heard your daughter is very skilled. Please, not resignation. And you apologize to him." "Wait, Dad. What's going on?" I whispered to him. "I had let the boss know that you were employed here, to look out for you. As I knew that you don't like the preferential treatment, I told him just to keep an eye out. Ignoring the boss and his daughter, Steve explained kindly. But I never thought this company would treat its employees like slaves. Lenore, you can quit now. You've done well here for 6 years. Come work for me. That's sudden. I can't just leave in the middle of the busy season. I protested. Dad seemed a bit exasperated by my response, but he eventually agreed. All right, if you insist. After this busy season, come work for my company. And you, it must be uncomfortable staying here after this. What do you say? The industry is the same. He kindly offered this to Sissy. Yes, absolutely. Sissy replied immediately. Wait, Sissy. I haven't decided yet. I protested. Sissy looked at me quizzically. Why not? Your dad's company is one of the elite in the country, and you're his daughter. Why wouldn't you go? Dad nodded in agreement with Sissy's words. I don't want to join his company just because of connections. I know Dad's company is big, but I didn't want to take the easy way. I explained. Sissy smiled happily. That's so like you, Lenore. And she continued. Lenore's father, I'm Sissy. I really appreciate that I can work with her. She is an outstanding boss. As she praised me, Dad smiled and sobbed along. I felt embarrassed and urged Dad to continue. Dad, the boss is still. Ah, right, forgot about that. Sorry, Sissy, we'll talk later. Yes. Sissy cheerfully replied. Now, boss, no need to apologize anymore. Let's end our business dealings here. As my dad finally addressed to him, he was surprised and looked up at Dad. That would be a great loss for us. I'm truly sorry. No, it's fine. This isn't because of the disrespectful behavior towards them. Then why? He asked. Please guide me. I'll improve anything. I'll definitely make improvements. The company would suffer a huge blow if they lost their dealings with Dad. That's why the boss kept apologizing repeatedly. Improvement is impossible. Once trust is lost, it can't be regained. You say employees are your priority, yet your daughter treats them like slaves. Did you think I wouldn't hear about it? I'm not sure. Even from the side, I can see Carol turned pale. I could demote you from the boss, but should I? Dad asked. Please, forgive me. The boss pleaded. Hey, Dad. Just because you're a valued client, you can't really do that, can you? I asked. I can. Dad replied with a smile, indicating he really had the power. I don't inquire deeply into the relationship between the boss and Dad, but Dad might be more powerful in this industry than I thought. With this realization, the both attitudes of my dad and the boss make sense. I won't go that far since I'm not a child, but I will end our contract. Thank you for your business. With that, he stood up, straightening his suit. Please, I'm begging you. Just for this term, please reconsider. How about a promotion for your daughter? No, a raise. She can even become an executive right now. Dad! But you said I would start from manager because of how it looks to others. An immediate promotion to executive is impossible. At that moment, my dad's look at the two changed to one of disdain. And the boss's pleading eyes were fixed squarely on Carol. Despite this, Carol still seemed dissatisfied with the difference between what her father had said about my position and her own treatment. I almost felt sorry for the boss with such an oblivious daughter. But I had reached my limit and couldn't hold back anymore. You plan to put a woman who called us lowly, poor employees and was rude to Dad in a position of authority? I blurted out. Well, my daughter doesn't understand because she hasn't experienced the real world yet. She'll learn to respect others through the hardships of society. Respecting others has nothing to do with social experience. I interjected, louder than I intended. Carol looked up, startled, and I addressed her. A company cannot function without its employees. Even someone who has never been an executive, like me, understands this. But you don't. Why? How would I know that? Carol seemed genuinely clueless. Do you think being a daughter of privilege puts you above others? Of course. I'm from a different upbringing. It's not my decision, it's God's. To Carol's nonsensical reply, I forced a smile. Then, as the daughter of this company's boss, I'm higher than you, right? You'll listen to me? My smile was apparently so frightening that Sissy later told me it scared Carol, whose composure vanished. Fine, what do you want? This company is not your playground. If you want to play, go find your college friends. Carol hung her head in shame, her face flushed. Sissy quietly applauded me. Well said. That's my daughter. Dad laughed heartily. After that, Sissy and I spent a hectic month at work. But the second half of the busy season was unexpectedly calm. Each time our supervisors and colleagues looked puzzled, Sissy and I exchanged knowing smiles. A month later, Sissy and I resigned and joined my dad's company. Our previous company began to decline drastically. Rumors quickly spread that the abrupt termination of the contract with a major firm was to blame, prompting other companies to reconsider their dealings. Sales plummeted by 40%, most employees started job hunting, and the company's decline accelerated. The general meeting decided the crisis was due to the boss's fault, and he was ousted. His brother is now trying to rebuild the company. According to Dad, this brother is well respected. The company might be reborn into something better. On the condition that the former boss's family no longer be involved, Dad began moves to restart dealings with them. I also heard from Dad that the former boss's family began to lose their possessions, eventually selling their house. I don't know where they went, but I doubt a family accustomed to such wealth could adapt to normal life. In fact, Carol reportedly got a job at a grocery store, acted arrogantly to customers, got into an argument, and was fired within hours, becoming somewhat of a legend. In my personal life, I managed to convince Dad to let me start as a regular employee instead of directly becoming an executive. However, I'm aware that I'll eventually take over the company. So, I balance my everyday tasks with assisting the executive team. Constantly amazed by their innovative ideas that never occur to me, sometimes feeling overwhelmed. But every time I feel like my head is about to explode, Sissy is there by my side, saying, Lenore, let's finish this task first. Then we can decide the priority for the next ones. Her support keeps me grounded. Sometimes the pressure of being the boss's daughter feels crushing, but with Sissy around, I can stay confident and cope. Interestingly, Dad also likes Sissy, and sometimes the three of us go out for drinks. Every time Dad gets tipsy and tells this joke. Lenore will be the next president, and Sissy the next executive officer. Don't even think about getting married and retiring, you too. He often tells this story laughingly. However, what Dad doesn't know is that I'm secretly in a relationship. My desire to get married is still a secret from Dad.